On va faire la conférence français-anglais. Tom va commencer de journaliste canadien pour liberté d'expression en anglais. Après ça, je vais parler en français comme journaliste qui va parler.
Okay, so if we're ready to go, my name is Tom Hennifer. As Simon said, I'm the Executive Director of Canadian Journalists for Free Expression, CJFE, and I'm going to read just a brief statement for you all. So today I moderated a meeting between members of Montreal's independent media and the Montreal Police to discuss the treatment of journalists covering protests. The protests in Montreal have been chaotic, and both protesters and police have gone too far in some instances, resulting in injuries on both sides. Unfortunately, journalists have too often been caught in the middle. Many have been arrested, injured, and kettled in violation of their rights, and many independent journalists have been denied access to cover protests while their colleagues from larger outlets are able to pass through police lines. But we cannot change what happened in the past, so today we met to ensure that the police and the independent press can cooperate with a mutual respect for each other's work and each other's safety. Every citizen has a right to free expression, and the press must be able to report in an unobstructed manner. CGFE is here to ensure the media in Montreal enjoys or respects their rights. That said, rights do have limits, and both public and individual safety can come under threat if a protest turns violent. So, the members of the independent media today pledge to obey all police orders and to avoid obstruction of police work during the protests. For their part, the SPVM has agreed to recognize the independent press, to allow them to cover protests, and to establish a set of ground rules that everyone will follow to ensure that everyone can report in as unobstructed a manner as possible without interfering with police work and to keep everyone as safe as possible. This meeting is the start of an ongoing conversation we plan to hold with the police. We also know there are expected to be many protests this fall, and in order to hold all parties accountable, are exploring options to create some human rights monitors with other organizations who would be on the ground to hold both police and journalists accountable as neutral observers to make sure that everyone is safe. The past has seen far too much aggression and violence meted out on the press. Too many good reporters have been hurt or arrested. Today we took a major step forward in ensuring the safety of reporters and the independent press exercising their constitutional rights on the ground in Montreal. Thank you.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Simon Van Vliet, je suis président de l'Association des journalistes indépendants du Québec. L'AGIC joint sa voix à celle des journalistes canadiens pour la liberté d'expression qui s'inquiètent de constater que certaines pratiques du service de police de la Ville de Montréal portent atteinte à la liberté de presse lors de manifestations. Depuis 2012, plusieurs journalistes, et en particulier des journalistes identifiés à des médias étudiants ou indépendants, ont fait état de discrimination, d'intimidation ou de brutalité policière. La situation est critique à tel point que certains journalistes hésitent à se rendre sur le terrain pour couvrir les manifestations, pour rendre compte de ce qui se passe dans la rue. En prévision de la reprise des mobilisations cet automne, il nous semblait nécessaire de faire le point avec le SPVM afin d'assurer la sécurité des journalistes qui couvrent les manifestations et de permettre aux médias de documenter sans entrave le travail de la police. La rencontre de ce matin s'est tenue d'un commun accord et tout le monde en ressort avec le sentiment que c'est une rencontre importante qui a permis de jeter les bases d'une conversation qui va se poursuivre pour justement établir un peu des règles de base, des règles de conduite qui vont permettre aux journalistes de faire leur travail sans interférer avec celui de la police et aux policiers de faire le leur sans interférer avec le travail des journalistes et des médias. Dans le contexte de la campagne électorale en cours au niveau fédéral, l'AGIC tenait à participer à cette rencontre-là et tient à demander aux autorités publiques, tant au niveau municipal qu'au niveau provincial et fédéral, de s'assurer que la protection des libertés fondamentales qui est garantie par la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés soit renforcée, notamment la liberté de la presse et des autres moyens de communication. L'institution policière jouit de pouvoirs et de privilèges extraordinaires, dont celui d'utiliser la force pour appliquer la loi. Dans une société libre et démocratique, les médias ont le droit et la responsabilité de veiller à ce que la police exerce ses pouvoirs avec circonspection, et en particulier lors de manifestations à caractère politique. Donc, nous espérons sincèrement que la rencontre de ce matin avec le SPVM va se traduire par des changements de pratique sur le terrain lors des prochaines manifestations. La rencontre qu'on a eue semble indiquer que c'est cette voie-là qui va être empruntée tant par le SPVM que par les organisations de journalistes, par les médias. Et donc, on va être très attentifs dans les prochaines semaines de voir à ce que le traitement des journalistes soit respectueux et équitable, et ça, peu importe s'il s'agit de médias étudiants, de médias indépendants ou de médias grand public. Voilà, merci. Maintenant, je cède la parole à Matt Damour.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Damour of the Link newspaper and 99% Media, and we'll be making some remarks in French a little bit later on. Simon and Tom have pointed out some things that were very constructive about this meeting, and I share those feelings as well. Nobody is under the illusion that change is going to happen right away, but we have taken a very important step towards starting a dialogue with the SPVM to make sure that the situation and the conditions that journalists, whether they be independent, mainstream, or otherwise, will improve, and that also the police can do their job without us interfering, because everybody agreed that both parties should be respecting what the other is doing. I do think that the meeting was conducted in good faith. I am hopeful, and the main hope that I have is that I will no longer have conversations with some of my student journalist colleagues who tell me that they no longer want to go out and cover a protest because they are afraid. Because they're afraid of how they're going to be treated by the police. And again, we're not saying that every police officer is guilty of this, but there have been too many situations where people have been either denied access or outright assaulted by police for simply trying to cover a protest. Alors, on a eu une très bonne conversation avec la SPVM. C'était constructif. J'ai l'espoir que les choses vont améliorer pour les journalistes. Ça va pas se passer tout de suite. Il y a encore des étapes, mais on a commencé la conversation et je pense que c'est l'étape la plus importante. Merci.
Donc, on a quelques personnes qui sont disponibles pour entrevue, soit en français ou en anglais. Il y a Shane Murphy du Baker Daily, Simon Lucier de 99% Média, Jeff Côté de GAFA. Donc, il y a Corey aussi de CTV. Donc, moi-même, Tom Hennifer, Mathieu Damour aussi, si vous avez des questions, on est là-bas sur certains aspects, on est disponible.
I'm happy to take any questions in English.
I have a question. You said something about how journalists would follow all police orders, but sometimes the police orders are quite unreasonable. So there's a bit of a conflict there. I mean,
Yeah,
if the police tell you to go 50 feet away, or the police don't allow access, then that sort of defeats the purpose of this meeting, the way I see it.
Right. Well, now we are working with them to make sure that the police have an understanding that we still need to do our jobs and be granted reasonable access. That said, on the ground, it is important that when these events are happening, that journalists still obey the police orders, because if they don't, it will generally result in their arrest, whether that's justified or not. So we're going to be working with them in a proactive way to ensure that journalists are able to actually get in and cover these protests from a reasonable and safe distance, as opposed to being pushed so far back that they can't get a shot. But that's something that has to be done proactively, because the fact of the matter is that whether we feel the order is justified or not on the ground, journalists do have to listen to what the police is telling them during a protest. Because if not, the police can still arrest them, and that doesn't help anyone.
Peut-être pour ajouter à ça, dans la discussion sur les règles de base dont on discutait, cette question-là est soulevée de dire il faut que les journalistes laissent une distance raisonnable aux policiers pour pouvoir faire leur travail, mais il faut aussi que les policiers donnent aux journalistes la possibilité d'avoir une vue sur la scène, de pouvoir enregistrer le son. Donc, ça fonctionne dans les deux sens, puis c'est un travail qui va se poursuivre dans d'autres discussions. On s'est laissé il y a quelques minutes sur la conclusion que c'était une première rencontre, qu'il y en aurait d'autres et qu'on allait travailler justement à préciser de comment opérationnellement cette réalité-là peut être réalisée, donc d'avoir à la fois les journalistes qui peuvent faire le travail et les policiers qui font l'art, et ça en toute sécurité de part et d'autre.
How do you think that we could raise sensitization among the stations towards the journalists? I mean, are you going to be any proactive kind of steps taken by the different stations to push some resources to the journalists?
To push, sorry?
Well,
Well, that's what this meeting is all about, was that we have open lines of communication, specifically between 99% Media and CUTV, and The Link and the Guild Daily, I'm correct with all of those, so there is a good coalition of independent media now who is speaking to the SPVM to absolutely raise the sensitivity about those issues. We know that in terms of mainstream media, they're also meeting with FPJQ, so there is lots of ongoing discussion, and based on the tone of this meeting, it certainly seems like the SPVM is willing to work with journalists to make sure that this is that they're able to do their jobs well. There were two main issues that they raised, which is that they want to ensure that journalists are basically a safe distance from the action, especially when there is an individual arrest going on. We don't think that's a problem. And we also have said that we're happy to stay a safe distance when there's an arrest going on, but you need to allow us to still get our shots as opposed to pushing us back and pushing us back and pushing us back. So there's a lot of compromise that can happen. The SPVM certainly seems to understand what we're asking for, and they're very willing to meet with us. And like I said, they will be coming down with some ground rules for journalists to follow on the ground, and they will also be at the same time sending those down to their officers so that they are aware of how to identify journalists. And the identification will not be based on certification, but it will be based on behavior. So people who are acting like professional journalists will be treated like professional journalists. And that is, again, whether this action actually happens will remain to be seen. That we have to have a protest actually happen in order to see that SPVM is acting on all their promises. But we have every reason to believe that these promises were made in good faith, and this will be an ongoing conversation. They also emphasize the fact that there will be, just as there are some journalists who push things too far occasionally, there are police officers who push things too far. And that's a problem, especially in these heated protests when things turn violent. There's a risk that will happen. And they said likely incidents like that will happen again. But the channels of communication will be open so that we can get in touch with the communications, media relations people at the SPVM, and they will talk to us and do their best to make things right. In the same way that if a journalist is acting poorly, they'll be able to get in touch with their outlet and make things right in that regard.
Avez-vous parlé de la question des souricières spécifiquement?
C'est-à-dire les journalistes qui sont à l'intérieur des souricières. La question a été abordée. La discussion reste embryonnaire à ce stade-ci. Ce qui est clair de la part du SPVM, c'est que si des journalistes se font encercler dans une souricière, il est possible pour les journalistes de sortir, mais il faut qu'ils fassent dès que la souricière est formée, et pas qu'ils attendent à la fin de la souricière, qu'ils attendent d'être amenés au centre de détention ou d'être. Donc, la proposition du SPVM semble être à ce stade-ci, c'est que les journalistes doivent se disperser au moment où la manifestation est déclarée légale, ou en tout cas se retirer de la manifestation pour éviter de se retrouver pris en souricière. Maintenant, si la souricière se forme rapidement et que les membres des médias se trouvent pris à l'intérieur de la souricière, c'est possible d'avoir de faire sortir les journalistes. C'est d'ailleurs pour ça qu'il y a des lignes de communication qui vont s'ouvrir entre les différents groupes de médias et le service des communications du SPVM pour permettre aux journalistes de sortir de la souricière et ensuite, évidemment, l'autre partie de la souricière, c'est de pouvoir la filmer de l'extérieur, de pouvoir avoir une vue sur les interventions policières qui sont faites lors de la souricière. Ça fait partie de toute la discussion sur quelle est la distance raisonnable et comment est-ce que on va pouvoir mettre en pratique tout ça. Ça reste des choses qui vont être discutées plus en détail une fois que le SPVM va faire sa proposition de règles de base et va la soumettre aux journalistes pour évaluation et réflexion. Donc, cette question-là pourra être approfondie en temps et lieu.
And to add to this point, the issue is also raised of situations where journalists are actually outside of an area that is going to be kettled, and they are told by police officers to enter an area that is about to be kettled so that they can be ensnared in the kettle. This was brought up, and there was an acknowledgement that this is something that should not be happening. It was very clearly laid out that this is not supposed to be Montreal Police operation standards, so there is going to be a conversation about trying to limit situations where that kind of thing happens.
Any other questions?
Anything has been, you mentioned earlier that credentials are not going to be used really to identify journalists. It's going to be by behavior. What are the limits to that?
I mean, the behavior, credentials are still useful, but a credential won't be a guarantee of anything. It won't necessarily get you out of a kettle. It won't necessarily allow you, it won't let you cover more closely than the police feel you should be covering. So what it comes down to is journalists should not be taking part in the protests. They shouldn't be chanting. They certainly, if things turn violent, they shouldn't be throwing rocks. They shouldn't be arguing or getting in the face of police or obstructing their view so that they can't do their work. So what it comes down to is behaving professionally and being an independent, neutral observer of the protest as opposed to taking part in the protest. Is really what that comes down to.
Il y a d'autres questions, sinon on peut faire des entrevues individuellement.
Okay, so we can break off and do individual interviews there then for anyone who'd like to. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Merci.
Sure. Who's this for? Any of my pedals?
C'était live? Ouais.
Contact me.